Croeso, hello, welcome back to Rob, Ryan, Red, the Wrexham podcast brought to you in association with Red 10 People Development. On today's podcast, we'll react to Wrexham's first summer signing. We'll get our views and that of a Plymouth Argyle podcaster, and we'll bring you an exclusive and extensive chat about all things finances ahead of our championship season. All that and more on today's show.
Rob, Ryan, Red.
So, Nath, the waiting game last week, and it finally paid off. Ryan Hardie, Wrexham's new summer sign-in. You're still at the European Championships. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm in Nitra, Slovakia, which is actually quite nice, but I wouldn't say put it top of your travel bucket list, in fairness. But I am enjoying my time in Slovakia. I did get one message that said, do not slag off Slovakian Wi-Fi. Just want to point out that this one is holding up well so far, touch wood. But yeah, I'm enjoying it. How are you doing? You're decked out in your Wrexham kit. I've just got my sort of summery shirt on. How are you getting on?
Yeah, I like your vibe a lot more. It's very red, isn't it? I realised this morning just how much I actually love the FA Trophy winning kit. I think it might be my favourite ever Wrexham shirt. I've changed my opinion once again on all this. Yeah, very good. Thank you very much. Where were you on Monday night then when Ryan Hardie signed?
I was in an Indian takeaway in the centre of Nitra, which is not a conversation. And I was trying to explain to the guy serving me, who didn't speak much English, that I needed 5 minutes before I could pay the bill because I was trying to send you images of Hardie. So he didn't understand what was going on. I didn't really understand what was going on. But yeah, Ryan Hardie in the building. And you know what? I know we're going to get the view of the Plymouth podcast, and I'm sure they're going to wax lyrical. My initial reaction, slightly underwhelmed, but the more I let it marinate, the more I came round to the fact that I think it's actually just a really clever bit of business and a move that suits Phil Parkinson down to the ground.
Just like the chicken you had at your injury on Monday, you've got to let it marinate, haven't you? Let it sink in, get those flavours going. And yeah, I think it's very difficult, isn't it, to sign just a really effective sort of championship player, because you just, it's not as sexy as signing someone from the Premier League or that you know loads about. And I'm not going to pretend I know a lot about Ryan Hardie. I remember him from Plymouth's exploits in the FA Cup last season and sort of watching from afar. And he's a name I know of, but I didn't really have a clue who he was, what type of striker he was at all. He says he likes to play on the last line of defence. He's very mobile. Him and Smith up front, I think there'll be a lot of movement from our forward line next season. That's developed quite nicely, that. And yeah, I think, like you said, Nath, what was it, double digits for goals in his last 4 seasons, 2 of those seasons in the Championship. I'm really happy with this one.
Yeah, I think, you know what really sort of scarred my opinion, which is just totally unfair as well on Ryan Hardie, is that I covered a game when Wayne Rooney's Plymouth played Sheffield United away. So it was like really tough game, like Plymouth near the relegation zone or in the relegation zone, Sheffield United like top, second top, it might have been top v bottom or something close to that. And Plymouth were actually the better team on that day. I think Gus Harmer scored the only goal. Sheffield United win 1-0. They got away with it in the end, and obviously Rooney ends up getting the boot. But that day, I thought Hardie really struggled to have any impact on the game whatsoever. But when you take a step back, he's leading the line for one of the worst teams, if not the worst team, in that division. So it's a thankless task, right? Like, I think beginning of the season, when Wrexham didn't quite have their groove, we were saying the same about Ollie Rathburn. Like, how can Ollie Rathburn sort of play as his second striker? Like, it doesn't. And actually, you eventually find a role that fits in a team that's doing well, and talent flourishes, right? So the more I let it marinate, as we're going to keep that one going, I did sort of think that, all right, he's got double digits for a team that doesn't create a huge number of chances. He doesn't touch the ball a lot when you actually look at his touches per match. So if that's going to be the case, you're not touching it much in a team that's in the relegation zone or the bottom 6. And also, all right, every Phil Parkinson signing, and we might do this in the weeks to come, like ranking every signing of the Rob and Ryan era, because that'd be quite fun. I think there's 52 signings he's made now. Most of them, 90% of them have been brilliant, haven't they? There've been a couple of misses, but those are few and far between, I would say. So Phil Parkinson has wanted Ryan Hardie for a year. Didn't get him in January, got him in the summer. He wanted Ryan Longman Was it last summer? Got him in January. Like, typically, Phil Parkinson finds a player he likes, analyzes a player, finds scouts, and then just keeps at it like a dog with a bone until he gets that player. And for what was it, 600,000? I think Ryan Hardie, I'm sure the Plymouth fan will tell us now, Joe, I think Ryan Hardie is probably going to prove to be a real bargain.
Yeah, persistence pays off. And I think you made a good point there that it's about the context of the team you're in. It kind of reminds me of when we went and got Ollie Palmer in non-league. He wasn't this big glamorous striker that lots of fans maybe wanted at the time, but he's been there and done that. He's very experienced, really effective. And you put Ollie Palmer in our team, okay, they're a very different profile of player, but he just, he was brilliant. And I think, like you said, there's a reason why Parky's chased him for so long. And as you hit in, Nath, there's a reason why Plymouth fans are so upset to see him leave as well. This one is anyway. Right then, Wrexham have completed their first summer signing. Joe from the Green and White podcast, you know more about Ryan Hardie than we do. What can Wrexham expect from their new signing?
You can expect one of the hardest working players I think I've seen at Argyle in recent years. Just to give a bit of context, if you go all the way back to 2019, we've just been relegated from League One. It was one of the early years of Simon Hallett, our current chairman's tenure in charge. It was a complete gutting of the club that summer. We brought in Ryan Lowe, Stephen Schumacher and Neil Dewsnip that summer to take us on a 5-year plan that was to take us to the Championship. Ryan joined in the January of 2020, so 6 months into the project. And he's been on every step with us since. And he got us to the Championship. He was a huge part of getting us to the Championship. He was then a huge part of keeping us in the Championship. And single-handedly, alongside Mustafa Bundu, then tried to keep the team afloat last year after the Christmas period. So he's an incredibly loyal person. He is a really good bloke. He will try his heart out every time he puts on the red shirt of Wrexham. That still doesn't sound right. But he is a brilliant player, a brilliant person, and he will be a huge loss to Argyle.
In terms of his sort of traits as a player, then, what type of striker is he? I think he said himself he likes to play off the last line of defence. He sees himself as sort of a mobile sort of finisher. But watching the compilation you guys put out of his goals, he seems to have that variety. Always seems to be in between the posts. And was it a beautiful chip goal he scored against Sunderland a few years ago as well? He seems to have that composure in front of net. But from watching him as a fan, what did you sort of notice about his game?
He's quite infuriating because he's going to try and chip the keeper every time he gets in and around the box. So they're not always going to come off. So just have a little bit of patience with that. What he said is absolutely spot on. He runs off the shoulder of the last man. He always finds the space between the two centre halves to get in there. But if you clip those nice balls over the top or just into a bit of a gap and get him running into the channels, he's deceptively quick. He has a huge stride on him. In a 100-meter race, he probably wouldn't clock the fastest time, but he would keep up with the fastest player because he can just cover so much ground quickly. And he is an incredibly acute finisher. Anybody who wants to see what Ryan Hardie is about, look at any game. Portsmouth fans are going to hate me for saying this. Look at any game that Argyle have played against Portsmouth in the last 5 years, because he scores the same goal against them every time. We clip it in behind the back line. He runs in on goal, and he'll either chip the keeper or just slot it past him. He, as I say, he loves the hot dog finish. That was his nickname down here, telling the keeper and the defenders for hot dogs. But he can be frustrating because sometimes he tries to do the same finish all the time, when sometimes you're just thinking, just put your boot through it or just tap it past him. But he'll always try and put the gloss on it. But when he pulls it off, you think that's quality. And that is what Ryan Hardie is. He's not notched up the amount of goals he has for Argyle without being a quality number 9.
I think that's also important context there. I think when Wrexham fans look at a new sign, I'm sure as you do, you go straight to Wikipedia, you see how many goals they've got in that little column next to their name. And, double figures in his last 4 seasons for Argyle, 2 of them in the Championship. It is worth noting, isn't it, that no disrespect, but one of the last season particularly was a difficult season for you. So to get that amount of goals and that output is still quite an achievement, isn't it? Like, was he feeding off scraps for most of the season?
Yeah, kind of. I mean, I've always thought for the majority of the time he was with us, we were never truly giving him the proper service he probably wanted. He was always, between him, for a lot of the period, obviously it was him and Morgan Whittaker. They were linking up, Morgan would play him the ball and he'd just do the rest of it, sort of thing. But, as you say, you don't score as many goals as he does. You don't notch up as much of a record as he does. I mean, he's going to end now as the 12th leading all-time goal scorer for Argyle. I think he's in the top 50 for appearances. He is going to have his face painted on a wall at home park somewhere in the ground. He will have a mural. He's of that sort of standing, and he's a streaky player. And going back to having patience and giving him time with his finishes, you're going to have to give him time with his performances as well, because he will go on runs where he won't score in 12. Then he'll get one, and before you know it, he's got 8 and 5. He's that type of player. He's a high confidence player. I mean, if you go back to last year, he scored 2 goals against Cardiff at home park. I think it was Cardiff. It was either Cardiff or Swansea. I'm sure it was Cardiff. In a 3-1
They don't
win.
mind getting mixed up, those two teams. It's fine.
No. Ian Foster had come in as head coach, and it was one of his early games, and he ran Hardie into the ground that day. Like, Ryan emptied the tank completely. He actually he could barely walk off the pitch when he was substituted on his hat-trick. And he never recovered from that. He had a little bit of an injury setback and never recovered, and it actually took him until just before Christmas, I think it was, to get his first goal from open play since February. Like, that's how he scored a penalty against Sunderland at the start of the year, but in that time he hadn't scored in open play. And he is a streaky player, but when he's on it, I don't think there are too many more potent number 9s in the Championship. Therefore, I'm not surprised that, you've triggered the release clause and got him for such a measly fee.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. Was it the wide expectation anyway that he was going to leave this summer, and like you said, that fee makes him even more appealing. If he wouldn't have had that relegation release clause, do you still think he would have left maybe this summer just because he is now a Championship caliber player?
Yeah, I think there was always going to be interest. I mean, the biggest bone of contention down here in the last couple of years is how he's never got a Scotland call-up. I mean, when you look at some of the centre-forwards Scotland flog out, and Ryan Hardie still can't get a call-up, I don't know what Steve Clarke doesn't rate about him, but it's outrageous. So I hope of all of this that he is able to earn himself a Scotland call-up now that he's obviously going to be in a bit more of a limelight at Wrexham. But I don't think it's a surprise he's gone. It doesn't make it any easier to stomach. As I say, this is a guy who's been on every step of the journey since we turned the club around in 2019. He loved the area. His family, his missus loved the area. His child had grown up in the city as well. So I don't think it was ever a case of Ryan trying to force his way out. But the problem is, when you've got the release clause in there, everybody's hands are tied, aren't they? From the moment that's activated, it's out of your control. If you look at Argyle's fan base on X and on all the forums, there'll be no hatred towards Ryan Hardie whatsoever. The only sticking point for us is the fact that, in my opinion personally, we've let a £1.5–2 million striker go for less than half of his, not even the lower end of that valuation, half at the lower end. But, this is something that, unfortunately, we're used to as a fan base. Our best assets don't normally go for their true value. So you've got him at a good price. And I'm absolutely convinced that he's going to go on and do a great job for you. I don't know where he'll fit into your pecking order, obviously, with the strikers you've got. But he was redeveloped a little bit by Miron Muslic, playing not as the number 9, but just off the number 9 towards the back end of the season. And that was a position he seemed to do quite well in. But he's just a very good all-round centre-forward at that level. And I'm a little bit surprised there wasn't more interest in him coming into this summer. But in terms of whether it was a surprise, I think deep down I wanted to believe that he would reject anything, even if the release clause was met. But I think, with the job that the two boys are doing at Wrexham, with the community being at the heart of everything, I think that sort of sung to him quite a lot than, say, going to a QPR and just being a number 9 sort of thing would have done. So, he's not somebody who'll be easily swayed just by football decisions. I think it's got to be a lot about his life, his family, and things. He puts them first. So I just wish him nothing but every success. He's part of our 101 club, we call them, the team that got us out of League One. And anybody from that squad, wherever they go, they get nothing but best wishes. And all we want is they go and get good game time. And hopefully Ryan does that. And maybe if there's a chance one day he can come back and get the 7 goals he needs to get into our top 10 of all time, then he will be more than happy to come back to Plymouth. He'll be welcomed back with open arms.
Yeah, Dan Scar and Ryan Hardie now both in Wrexham shirts. So it's one of
And Callum Burton.
and Burton as well. I mean, Burton
Burton.
is a very underrated second choice goalkeeper. I feel at Wrexham anyway. I think we saw that in glimpses last season. And I suppose there's 2 questions I want to ask here. One of them, I mean, I'll ask you the other question. There's noise about a takeover at Plymouth, and I think it is worth us mentioning that. Like you said, it's still probably very early stages, and headlines are there for a reason to attract interest. But it does feel like there's a real uniqueness about Plymouth, similar to there is at Wrexham. You know, there's a massive catchment area there. There's a real community behind it, and if the football's going well, everyone's behind the football team. So I guess from your point of view, I just wanted to ask you, what are those sort of similarities with Plymouth? How integral is the football team into the whole sort of culture down there?
What people don't realise is they see it on a map and they see it when they're coming down to Home Park, just how far away it is, and they know it's a tough track. I don't think people really understand what it's like to A, support Argyle, but B, play for Argyle. Stephen Schumacher used to talk about this all the time when he was in charge. I mean, that would be the next thing. You'll end up with Stephen Schumacher as the head coach, and you'll get the whole club back, the whole squad back together. But it's a unique thing where you have to buy into it. You can't just dip in and out. You can't be half invested. If you're going to play for Argyle, you have to be fully immersed in it. Because it is weird. It's not weird in the sense that everything about it's strange. It's just because you spend so long on the coach, there's always at least 1,000 fans at every away game, despite it being at the other end of the universe. It's quite a unique feeling. It's a club that, when Argyle do well, the city of Plymouth tends to be successful. You know, I mean, even as many as 6-7 years ago, if I was to walk through the city centre, all you'd see is Liverpool, United, Arsenal, Chelsea shirts. That's all. You walk. I was literally in the city centre about an hour ago. All you could see was Argyle shirts. People have got the new shirt on from this year. They have last season's shirt on because of the job that the club have done over the last 5-6 years. They've gone back into the community. They brought it back together. And that's one of the things that will be Simon Hallett's legacy as the chairman, is that was a big thing for him. He wanted to unite the place again. So it's a weird thing with Argyle. And you touched on obviously the big news story this week that there's a proposed takeover being fronted by Gareth Bale and a bunch of Americans in a private equity firm. And I think if that's going to if that story has legs and that deal is to get off the ground, I think one thing they're going to have to do is not just watch Argyle games, but they're going to have to come to Plymouth and they're going to just have to sample the way of life. Because it is a strange way of life. We're on a limb. Nowhere is close to us. This season, our closest game is Exeter, which is obviously an hour up the road. After that, it's Cardiff. After that, it's Reading. Like, there's nothing within a close radius to us before this. So, I mean, last season, our closest game was Bristol City, and that's 3 hours on a coach, 2.5 hours on a car, if you're lucky. So, it's a quirky thing. It's something we all love. We're all incredibly passionate about it because we've got nothing else to get excited about down here. So, apart from our lovely scenery and lovely setting, but you're right. It's a club that's at the heart of its community, and I think that's what's appealed most to Ryan as to why Wrexham was a good project to take him from Argo. Because as I say, I don't think he would ever forcibly look for a move away from the club. But that just strikes me as a decent fit for him. He can do the best for his family, whilst also doing the best for his career by staying in the Championship, and he is a Championship striker.
Means you must have a very good knowledge of UK service stations as well. Part of me wants to just talk about Luke Young and Tyler Harvey, 2 former Wrexham players who came from Plymouth. Tyler Harvey in particular, I don't know if many of our listeners will remember who Tyler Harvey was when we signed him. Was it from Bath City in the end? But, you know, what a unique player he was. Still adamant there was a player in there. What I want to ask you, though, League One to Championship. Obviously, you've done it in reverse, sadly, this season. But
Yeah.
like you said, you had the 101 club, you've gone up to Championship, survived a season, and then fallen down. What are your maybe words of warning to Wrexham fans? Because we don't really know what to expect next season. We're a bit of an anomaly because we've got a lot of backing and a lot of ambition, but I think it is going to be very difficult anyway, isn't it? I mean, what would you say is the biggest difference between League One and the Championship?
I think we were out of it for 13 years before we went back, season before last. And while some of the clubs were the same, I remember thinking around the October, November time, we'd started the season really well. And well, I think we were 16th, 17th place, and that would have been an unbelievable finish had we stayed there. But I think when you look at it, the step up is a lot bigger than you think. Like I used to refer to it as a mini Premier League because of the size of the clubs that are in there. Obviously this year, if you've got coming down, you've got Leicester, Southampton, and
Ipswich.
Yeah. So you've got three very big clubs at that level. Obviously, Leicester are not quite the club they were 6-7 years ago. But the other thing about it is, and I presume the first aim will be to stay up as soon as you can, get mathematically safe, and then if you've still got time to kick on, fantastic. The bottom half of the Championship is a much of a muchness. There isn't a huge amount. We saw it last year from about 14th, 15th down. There is nothing between the teams. I mean, we were on that incredible Great Escape run for a while, and it looked like we might well pull ourselves out of it, but there was a lot of dross that stayed up last year that will be easy to get points off. And, you've got to start by prioritising them as your fight, get 6 points off those teams. And then obviously you look at your Bristol Cities, your Norwiches, your Middlesbroughs. Can we get something off them? Home form's going to be massive. That's what we found first year. I think we won. I think we only won 3 games away, didn't we, or something stupid in that first season back. So that told you how does a team stay up having just won 3 games away from home? It's quite ridiculous. But you got to make your home ground a fortress. And the other thing that we didn't get last year is get a bit of luck. We had a number of key decisions go against us in the second half of the season, so you're obviously going to have to get a bit of luck. But I think when I see what was left in the Championship that we didn't bring with us, I think you're going to have no problems in staying in the division, absolutely not. And then whether or not you can breach that sort of top 12, top 10, that will be the task, because there's just some really, really irritating clubs like Norwich and Middlesbrough and Bristol City that just don't seem to move. They just stay in that same sort of purgatory level of the league. So embrace it. It's gonna be fun. It's a bonkers league. I love everything the Championship stands for. It's a shame we're not going to be in it again, but in 12 months' time, I might be back speaking to you guys in a preview pod, hopefully. So we'll wait and see, but just enjoy it. Enjoy the journey. Enjoy the big days out as well. There's some cracking grounds in that league. There's also some grounds I probably wouldn't recommend as highly, but just enjoy every bit of it, and yeah, just carry the momentum forward. That's what we did so well the first season. If you take the momentum that you built up last season, then you'll have a hell of a journey.
So, Nath, Ryan Hardie will be missed by those at Plymouth. I'm sure Gareth Bale will be able to get them someone to replace him and cheer them up. Other transfer news this week as well. Harry Darling, he's joined Norwich City. I know he was linked quite a bit with Wrexham, wasn't he, originally? I want to kind of ask you, before we move on to the finance chat, what do you think the next priority is for Wrexham this summer? We've gone and got a striker. I mean, do you think Hardie and Smith as the strike partnership will go into next season with, or do you think there still might be another striker?
I mean, you'd have to say yes, that would be the strike partnership to go in, but I was about to, we're on a similar wavelength after years of doing a podcast, when my exact question to you coming out the break was going to be, do you think we will sign another striker? So I think, right, the Wrexham will make a couple of splashes, not paying huge in terms of a transfer fee, but like 2 players you think, wow, that's they're significant signings, right? Kind of a Paul Mullin type signing at the time. And we should say, how candid were Paul Mullin and Ollie Palmer on the documentary this week? You know, Mullin talking about the resentment that he felt when he wasn't playing and how he's now going to be playing for himself rather than for anyone else, which I thought was interesting and probably not the exact words you would want to hear as a manager. But, you know, I'm not going to criticize any player for being as honest as they can be. Palmer desperate to give it a go and try and be involved. I just don't see it. I don't see that happening. I would go for another marquee striker if I could, because anything happens to Smith or Hardie, you know, are you down to Fal, Marriott, Rodriguez? You've got a lot in there, 7 strikers, so you would need to move some on. Maybe the focus would be moving some on. I still think it's that, and we disagreed, I still think it's that attacking midfielder, Keeler Dunn or someone in that role that can really challenge Elliot Lee and you try and upgrade on that position there. Because I think a link man to get Hardie the ball, you know, Hardie will run the channels, but someone to really pick Hardie and Smith out is going to be vitally important.
Yeah, it's a difficult one, isn't it? I think there's an argument there that if you get a better quality attacking midfielder, then there's so much better service to your front line as well that they can get those goals and get those opportunities. I think we'll get a striker in on loan in the last few weeks of the window. You know, like we said, I think if we're going to make these high-profile loan moves, they will be in those final weeks once the manager's had a full pre-season, once they've seen who's surplus to requirements. So I wouldn't be surprised if we do get a striker, but it's someone on loan in the final few weeks after the season's already started, just before deadline day, personally. And yeah, I think for me, an attacking midfielder is what we need next, isn't it? It's just who that is. Do we want to go too early on this? Also, a word of note, this is something I was going to correct from last week, which I didn't really bring up before. I spoke to someone associated with the club, and they said the Club World Cup transfer window, we kind of said, Wrexham didn't sign anyone in that. Wrexham actually couldn't sign anyone in that window. It was only pre-contract agreements, which obviously Swansea did 3 or 4 of, didn't they, for the end of the month. But because it's the Welsh FA and there's no Welsh teams in the Club World Cup, that first 10-day window didn't actually apply to Wrexham at all. So we maybe got a bit too giddy and critical for no reason whatsoever. But obviously, as soon as the window reopened on Monday, Ryan Hardie was there to be presented as well. So that's probably why there was that, you know, the rumours last week of a signing, but it didn't materialise because we actually only had 1 day of the window and we signed someone on it.
Rich, I don't think we sort of killed the club over it. We were quite sort of
I think it's just interesting. We actually couldn't have signed anyone in the first 10-day window.
That is very interesting clarification. I was just saying that I think we were kind of nonplussed by it, but very interesting. And I would say we mentioned the drone footage, Wrexham AFC fan zone on YouTube doing great stuff, and really good to see them getting lots more subscribers and viewers and stuff. They did have the Ryan Hardie footage, and I thought it was really interesting. You could just see him being shown around, doing video of the stadium, and that was really interesting. And fair play to them; they didn't put it out before the club. I thought, what was really odd is that we're seeing more and more now, like POV footage, right? Like at the Club World Cup, I saw there was a ref cam, and we've seen that in the Premier League before, right? When I think it was Crystal Palace, Man United, you see Casemiro on his backside and Olise or someone scores. Right? Did you see that clip of Ryan Hardie having his medical and he's wearing the Meta Quest glasses or whatever? Yeah. And I very much enjoyed the fact the doctor just had no interest in who he was at all, and asked if he played centre half, and he was like, "No, I'm a striker actually." So yeah, I very much enjoy the fact that they're doing all the medicals, just is not interested in the slightest. So fair play, man, sticking to the job of checking for any issues.
Yeah, and again, I think I do really enjoy those sort of access all area videos. It's really interesting to see how the medicals sort of happen and take place, and the stuff they do, the questions are asked, and all that as well. So yeah, it's bring it on. Pre-season's getting closer. Obviously, a word of note as well, Nate. Next week's podcast will be a day later to incorporate fixture release day. So is it the Carabao Cup draw and all the EFL fixtures are released next Thursday?
That's it.
We'll do our podcast later in that day, just so you know, if you're watching now or listening, we'll be slightly later next week.
Rich, what I was going to say, though, is slowly but surely, Wrexham are building. I don't know if this is Ryan Reynolds is doing. I'm sure the headlines will give it him. But we are building a 5-a-side team of Ryans, because you've got Hardie in there. You've got Longman. You've got Barnett. Now, that's great engines for a 5-a-side. You're going to need people to go up and down. Hardie is a target man. Is he too tall for five-a-side? Not really sure if it's any benefit of being super, super tall five-a-side. And you get Reynolds in goal. Has he been linked to playing? Did he say he's played goalkeeper before? Or I made that up?
Took that amazing penalty at the Maracana, didn't he? Well? So maybe you have him up front. Maybe he's your wild card.
What do you do? Have a 2-2 and a 1. We just need one more player, and then we're all rhined out for a five-a-side team. So more Robs, please. That's what I say.
Maybe that's the future of TST. Just have the Wrexham Ryans and just see how far they can get. So we promised you, and we've promised you for a few weeks now, that we're going to bring on a football financial expert. Myself and Nate do know a bit, but we're not very clued up on the sort of the legality of it all and what we can actually say and things like that, and just making it hopefully very easy for you to follow at home as well. So we're very delighted to say that we were joined this week by Dr. Dan Plumley. He's a football finance expert, and he joined us to talk all things Wrexham and the Championship ahead of the new season. So Dan, Wrexham looking forward to a season in the Championship. I guess the big question is, how much is it going to cost the club compared to what League One was like? How big a gulf is this in terms of finances?
Yeah, it depends on how the owners want to play it, and I think we know how they will play it. They will certainly have a go. That's been the way they are operating. In terms of finances, if you could look at it through a couple of lenses. So if you look at the revenue difference, it tends to be on average that promotion from League One to the Championship would gain you an extra £7 to £10 million in revenue. Now that's mostly linked to TV money. That's the difference between what the EFL TV deal and the bit that trickles down from the Premier League as well puts on the club revenue line that is over and above what you would get as a League One club, which is worth about 6 million of that 7 to 10. And then when you look at the stretch on that, the other kind of 3 or 4 is often made up through bigger commercial deals, bigger partnerships, etc. Now, Wrexham's a bit of an anomaly within that because we know their ability to generate commercial deals, because we can see in the last set of accounts that was 2024 that club had a turnover of £26 million in League Two. Now, that figure alone will be bigger than some Championship clubs that are currently in that mix. If you look at non-parachute payment clubs, the average tends to hover at about £30 million revenue for those clubs. So on a revenue line, Wrexham are already up there and competing. So there will be an uplift in revenue for them through the TV cash, but there will also be considerable amount there that they'll leverage through what they've done previously with some of the things we've seen. So yeah, those are the kind of numbers that we talk about in terms of revenue. And in terms of cost, then, it really is, as I say, up to the owners. Historically, again, if you look at kind of good average ballpark numbers, you'd expect to be spending in and around sort of £10 million to try and compete in that league. But I think they might go higher, is my view on it. I think there's really going to be a push on, again, trying to get into the promotion part of it in the next couple of years. So they're kind of ballpark costs, but I think as we've seen with Wrexham, they are a bit of an anomaly to those ballparks, and I'd expect them to go higher than what, and keep going on that trajectory that they're trying to get to.
One of the questions that we get asked a lot is, what are parachute payments and how much of a gulf are they creating within the Championship? Because one of the suggestions we get is there's kind of the Premier League, the Championship clubs that get those parachute payments, and then the rest of the Championship. Is that how you see it? Is it such a sizable advantage when you get those parachute payments?
Yeah, it absolutely is. And I've been involved in applied research projects that have measured that and have found exactly that. So what you have across the last sort of 15, 20 years or so, and I'll come to the numbers in a minute, but on baseline terms, a club that has parachute payments is twice or 3 times more likely to get promoted back to the Premier League while they've got them, and they're also twice less likely to be relegated. So they do have a real impact on particularly the promotion shake-up in terms of movement back to the Premier League. The numbers are, at the minute, a parachute payment value in total is around £90 million spread across 3 years, and you get the largest part of that is paid in year one. It's around sort of £42, £44 million. Then there's another sort of £35 million payment year 2, and then it drops to kind of 15, 16 to get to that circa 90 million. And those are set against the TV distribution figures for the Premier League. So those are the numbers that you're working with. And that does absolutely create this position in the league of almost the haves and the have-nots. And that's not to say that if you have them, you're guaranteed to get back, but you are more likely, as I said, and the evidence would support that. And we can see that in the makeup of the league, can't we, over the last couple of years in particular. You know, we're just off the back of the 3 clubs that will drop back down into the Championship were the ones that went up to the Premier League. And then you've got Leeds and Burnley that have gone back up. Burnley straight away, Leeds within a couple of years. Sheffield United just missed out on the playoff final, but you'd expect them to be up there. You'd expect Leicester to be up there, Southampton. We know the clubs that are going to be in and around it. So, yeah, if you're trying to break into that group, you've got to then kind of, again, shift the dial a little bit further, because you are competing with clubs that, if we look at the average revenue, as I said, for a non-parachute payment club being anywhere between sort of 20 and 30 million, those clubs have got a revenue line that's going to be pushing 55, 60 and upwards because of that parachute payment boost. So you have got to be aware of that. And if you are going to compete with it, then that's where the kind of difference lies. And of course, being mindful as well of the league's profit and sustainability regulations, which Wrexham won't have had in the leagues prior to that.
Yeah, I've got to ask you about those. The PSR, FFP, they are just these sort of abbreviations that everyone in football knows, but maybe doesn't understand the workings out at Championship level. Is it right that, Wrexham at the moment have, is it a £40 million loss we can make, Nath?
I think that's it.
Over
I think
3
that's
years.
a buffer. Yeah.
It's a £40 million buffer Wrexham have at this moment in time. But of course, that's over 3 years. So you don't want to spend it all at once, because then you could reduce what you can do in the years ahead. So how does FFP or PSR work in the Championship? And is it different from, say, the Premier League?
Yes, it is. So, yeah, the figure, they both work on these acceptable loss calculations, which are based on cumulative 3-year rolling, as you say. So the Championship figure is 39 million over 3 years, and it's based on 13 million per season. There is a caveat to that where you have to make sure the owners have put in equity to contribute to the same value to get you to that 39 million. If not, if the owners don't put in equity to that value, you have to reduce as well. So I would expect again that Wrexham owners would put that money in to enable you to get the highest headroom, if you see where I'm going with that level of thinking. So let's work off 39 million for 3 years for Wrexham. The Premier League does exactly the same, but their figure is 105 million over 3 years. And that, again, is to principally account for the financial difference between Championship and Premier League, because what the Premier League are saying there is, if you are going to get promoted to our league, we appreciate you have to have some flex in that to be able to spend. So the principles of it are the same. The number that we put on the 3-year rolling figure changes. And that is brand new to Wrexham in a sense that they won't have had that in... There's no restrictions at all in the National League. There is a soft sort of wages to turnover cap in Leagues 1 and League 2, which some of your listeners might be aware of, this salary cost management protocol, but it's not really penalised. It's more of a thing that clubs have said they will adhere to. So this is now a regulatory framework where Wrexham will have to be inside the lines of that. So that's what they're up against from a kind of cost point of view, as we're alluding to. However, and again, this goes back to the overall motives of the owners, the strategic direction. We have absolutely seen Championship clubs gamble against those regulations for 3 years and try and make it to the Premier League. And of course, if that happens, and just to give you a couple of examples, if it happens, then your Championship PSR worries go away. And we could look at Aston Villa there as a good example. Wolves in a few years ago, both of those clubs were breaking Championship PSR but got promoted. We know the situation with Leicester, and they're back and forth with the Premier League on PSR. But you've got other clubs where it hasn't worked out. A Sheffield Wednesday, a Derby County. There's clubs that have gambled against it and have then been hit with embargoes and things. So it is very much a strategic gamble. But those are the regulations that Wrexham have to be mindful of now, being in that league.
I thought it was really interesting in terms of you mentioned that, because that was going to be my next question about gambling clubs get. It feels like in the Championship, because every year it gets to that playoff final and it's the £100 million game, right? Like every team that's in the Premier League roughly earns 109 million, even if you finish dead last.
Yeah.
And so we talk about the riches of the Premier League and how important it is to get there. Is there a word of warning, though, that while Wrexham are super healthy now, they've gone and got, say, Ryan Hardie for 600,000. That's a drop in the ocean for a Championship buy. But if they start looking at, they want to break that top six, they want to spend big money, is there just that little bit of caution that needs to be applied as well, that, as much as you want to get to the Premier League, let's keep it financially stable at the same time?
Yeah, I would absolutely say so, for sure. It's good business sense, isn't it? Intuitively, it's, of course you want to compete, and of course Wrexham have the money to compete. That's kind of a given, but they are loss making as well. So we talked about the revenue line, but they did that same season, and we're looking back to the League Two season. We haven't seen the figures for League One yet, but the £26 million revenue is impressive, but they lost nearly 10 million in that season as well. So yeah, I absolutely agree with you, Nathan. There's got to be that balance for me of it is a gamble if you're going to go right up against those regulations, and there are only 3 clubs that can get promoted. That's the way you've got to view it. There is that sporting jeopardy there that you have to be mindful of, and yeah, I think it makes good sense to, in that scenario planning, it's plan for the worst, hope for the best, and I'm sure they will be doing that behind the scenes. But there is a risk of caution, particularly in this league, and what we've seen throughout history is we have seen a lot of clubs gamble on that 3-year PSR period, and some have won. And that jackpot that you talk about, the gap is then right. So if we talked about the gap between League One and the Championship, if you get to the Premier League, if you've not been there before, that's 100 million overnight at least, and then you can leverage. So it is that jackpot that clubs are gambling against, but it certainly should come with a word of caution attached, for sure.
When you talk about those sort of gambles, I think from a football fan point of view, you always think, try to be positive anyway, that I could come off though, like, spend it all next season, we'll finish second, whatever, and it'd be fine. What are the maybe, like you said, the concerns then if Wrexham, say, did gamble and it didn't pay off? What sort of restraints would that have in the years ahead, potentially? Say if Wrexham did break these rules and the gamble didn't pay.
Yeah, really good question. I guess there are 2 kind of plausible scenarios here that we need to cover. So one is, of course, if you break those regulations and you're still in the Championship, then you are at the mercy of the EFL penalties in the long run. And this is 3 years away, right? It's not going to happen here and now for Wrexham, because we're talking kind of further down the line. But if let's say you gambled and you were still in that league, then the EFL can apply the punishments. Most of the time we've seen that, again, throughout history, be starting off with embargoes, not being able to sign players, restrictions on playing squad, etc. But it could lead to points deductions. Ultimately, is the kind of most severe sanction where it would hit the club on the pitch. The other thing that I've always said with this is, as well, from a more of a financial sustainability of the club perspective that we're talking about, is it's not unusual for football clubs to run up losses. A lot of them are loss making, and they are on the hook ultimately to the owners. It's the owners that foot the bill for those losses. So the other aspect of that is that's all okay if the owners remain interested and involved and want to put the money in and can put the money in. So there's a second part to that in terms of the ownership of the club more generally. And again, we've seen the story, haven't we? And what a phenomenal story it's been. There's nothing there to suggest that the co-owners are wanting to get out anytime soon. But you have to look at it through those 2 lenses. One is the sporting sanctions that the league can apply if you break the regulations. But the other, ultimately, from a financial point of view, if you are loss making, is the owners have got to remain invested to cover those losses ultimately.
I'm curious, just from your expert opinion, and I've had this conversation with people in the industry plenty of times, whether you think the future for the health of the pyramid would be a salary cap on, say, wages, on player wages, or do you actually, for the sake of business, do you need a free and open market? I can see both sides of what would be beneficial to clubs and what would be obviously beneficial to players.
Yeah, it's a brilliant question, and I genuinely think the answer is kind of somewhere in the middle of that, and I think I'll I'll caveat that with a couple of things you've mentioned. I'm not so sure a salary cap is the way to go. And I don't think it would work in English football now anyway, because you're trying to put something in that has never been there. And we're talking about 150 years of the football pyramid in this country. And the way the numbers have gone, you're not going to get to a stage, for me, where you're going to put a salary cap in and it works, because it's not the American model of sport, and that's been there since day one. So I don't think that works. And I think we've seen the kind of halfway house with this, and we're talking about PSR. What UEFA have done is already shift to a new set of regulations called financial sustainability regulations. And the principal component of that is not about acceptable losses anymore. You still can do that, but they're monitoring this squad cost rule quite heavily, which is basically how much of your revenue do you spend on wages, transfer fees, amortization, agents fees. It's all wrapped up now. UEFA are wanting that figure to be 70% of turnover in this transition period that we're in. And when we get to the end of the transition, that's going to be their marker. We've seen enough noises to suggest that the Premier League and the Championship are looking into this quite heavily and will follow suit in the future. So I think it's likely that we don't see a salary cap, but we see the Championship and the Premier League move to squad cost rule in the future to mirror UEFA. And that'll be the kind of halfway house. Now, within that, we will still see pockets of dominance from already established clubs, because if you are setting a figure against turnover, the more that you earn, the more you can spend against that squad cost. So it won't change the status quo too much, which, to answer your second part of your question, I still think we need to be appreciative of the fact that we want some competition in the pyramid as well. And I've done a lot of work around that kind of aspect of competitive balance. And what we see in the English football pyramid is, over the last 20, 30 years, the Premier League has declined in relative terms in competitive balance. And we've got this group of super elite clubs that are going to finish more often than not at the top end of the table. And we've talked about the impact parachute payments having in the Championship. And you've got this group of yo-yo clubs now that are kind of ahead of the rest of the Championship clubs. Now, I think that's a real problem for the pyramid. So I think we need to be mindful of this conversation about, actually, we want clubs to be able to compete and have a go, but we also need to be mindful of their own financial sustainability. So it's as you can see from that answer there, it's a really complex picture of salary cap, what happens with a regulatory framework and a move to squad cost. Ownership groups and ownership motives, again, are at the fore of that, and the kind of sporting integrity piece is really key to that argument.
We've looked for our rise really from non-league, and I think if you look at non-league and League Two in particular, we did have a strong financial advantage over the competitors. Of course, as you know, you've still got to spend it properly, invest it properly, and I think that is maybe something we feel externally we don't get the credit for, is spending the money as well as we have done. Now that Wrexham have gone to the Championship, though, where would we rank, do you think, in terms of our sort of financial muscle? Like you said, we expect to be below some of the established Championship teams, and those are the parachute payments. Whereabouts do you think Wrexham will sort of sit in that pack of 24 teams at the moment in terms of the money they've got and the power they can push this?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think just looking at the numbers we can see, again, if you look at the revenue in particular, we've not seen the League One season yet, but I said even in League Two, Wrexham had a revenue that was higher than some Championship clubs. So let's assume that's increased again in League One, which it will have done. Let's assume that's probably going to increase again in the Championship, which it will do with the TV payment uplift and everything else they're going to do. That could put them in the mid-table revenue position in that group of clubs that are not parachute payment clubs, but you kind of next sort of 6 or 8 that, if we look at a revenue table, somewhere between sort of 10 and 14, in that kind of ballpark. Now, budget-wise, we won't see these numbers from the outside looking in, but what will also happen is clubs will get wage budget calculations that they'll see for the league, but they don't know what club it's attached to. So the clubs will be guessing this internally, right? Who's that? What's that number? Who do we think that club is? I think it's also conceivable you would put Wrexham in that mid-table budget position as well, because they are going to increase the wage bill. Again, they are going to spend, as you've said. They will sign players on, wage fees that are in par with the league and some of those clubs. And I've said this before on record as well. I think this Championship season is going to be really interesting because you've got the Birmingham factor as well, as you guys will be fully aware. and you've got yourselves and Birmingham who are going to have a real go here and are really different to a kind of typical profile of a League One club that has come up. So I think it's going to be a really tough league this season, but I think you would put Wrexham kind of on revenue and budget terms. Certainly on revenue terms, we can see where they're going to land. Budget, we're not sure about because it's internal and we won't see those numbers. But you could quite conceivably put them in that middle group because their revenue line is going to be higher than some of the clubs in that league for sure.
The last question probably from me was about we've spoken on the podcast over the years about pure profit sometimes if you can sell a player, and in the Championship that feels it takes on extra importance because you're trying to bridge a gap and academy players are pure profit. And I thought maybe you could give us an explanation on obviously academy players being pure profit, but also does that also count if a deal has been amortized, so say spread over a year and you sell for more than what's remaining on the contract? Just give people an idea of how pure profit and kind of boosting your accounts could work.
Yeah, so those two examples are slightly different in the sense that to make it pure profit and the definition of what we mean by that in academy terms, you're basically looking at players that you've developed that haven't come in for a transfer fee. So if there's no transfer fee and you've had them all along, you don't amortise that fee over the length of a contract because there's nothing to set it against. So that's where you get into the realms of if you are selling academy players that you've developed and you haven't paid a fee for them, then that is the pure profit that you can book against PSR because you're just taking the transfer fee and it's all profit. If you look at players that you've bought for fees, then all of those would have an amortization number attached to them, which is the transfer fee divided by the length of the contract. And at any given point in time, they then have a book value to you as a club, which is what the club will then look at and go, okay, well, this is the book value of the squad. And then if we sell that player, we can look at the net difference between sale price and what they're worth. You should also be factoring wages into that consideration because that's a part of an expense of a player. So crucially, I think that comes down to, in terms of PSR and pure profit, is it a player that you've always had? Therefore, you haven't signed them for a transfer fee. So it is pure profit and that's your academy link through. If it's players that have been brought in on transfer fees and then have moved on for whatever reason, then you've got to take into account the amortization and the wage costs, and you would be factoring that into the overall net gain or not on transfers. But we've certainly seen clubs go down that route of investing in academies, which is, again, exempt from PSR. You can invest in your academy. There's no limit on what you can do there. It doesn't affect the bottom line PSR calculation. We have seen clubs look to do that, to grow their academy, bring through good players and then sell them on for a considerable profit as well. Or they're that good that they stay in your first team as well and have a real value to the club.
I was going to ask as well, last question, Dan, is when we talk about finances, it's so easy to talk transfers because that's where, you get excited really. But Wrexham are building a new stand at the moment in time, that'll be multi-million-pound project, still need to get a training ground sorted as well. How do these sort of external non-playing costs affect financial rules, or do they at all?
No, well, so those things are exempt from PSR. So there is a list on the EFL website and the Premier League which tells you what things are exempt. But in summary form, any stadium expansion or new stadia is exempt. Any other infrastructure costs are exempt. Any youth development, academy infrastructure, anything you put into the women's team development is exempt. All of those things are considered, it's not the best term, but you're looking at it like that's good investment. So that's stuff that we shouldn't be measuring the losses against because we know that comes at a cost. So the PSR stuff is mostly wrapped up in, as you say, transfer fees, wages, and that kind of on-pitch spend. So that Wrexham can absolutely do what they want with all that stadium infrastructure, academy, things like that, and that will come off the bottom line calculation. There's a cost element to that, as you say. Someone's got to pay for that, and I think then that goes back to the bigger project at Wrexham, and the owners are putting a substantial amount of money to get those things started, but also how you can then leverage that with borrowing from other partners, commercial lenders of finance to fund those projects. Also, how we know the revenue lines increase from the Disney, Netflix documentaries, the behind the scenes stuff, the commercial reach into the fan base in America that's boosting the revenue line. Obviously that can then be used to spend on things as well that you want to invest in. So those things are exempt from PSR, but are also very much part of the bigger project that is happening at that football club.
I guess the final question then is, how can Wrexham upset the apple cart next season? Is it as
Knew you were
simple
gonna
as
ask
you've
me
got to
that.
take a gamble, or do you think there are sort of educated, sensible next steps? Do you, like, from your point of view, would you say maybe do just see it as more of a 3-4 year project rather than getting a bit too giddy and excited when you're this close?
Yeah, absolutely. And I've said that on record before. I think and I said this when the club was bought in the National League, that to me is a 5 to 10 year project. And you're on that journey, and it's probably been accelerated a little bit, the timescale, don't get me wrong, because of the success on the pitch. But it was part of a bigger plan for me. And I think, if you look at the Championship now, going into that league, everything to me should be looking at a 3 to 5 year cycle on that in terms of the next strategic play. And there is that danger that you get swept up in, well, of course we're going to have a go, and I think they will have a go, is my gut feel. I do think you'll see them be aggressive and look to challenge. And again, if that accelerates the timeline and you get into that top half of the table, then I'm sure everybody will be looking at that going, well, that's a fantastic season. But the note of caution attached to that, as we've said, is actually there's a lot to be said for a stable Championship year, staying in that league, and then progressing forward and seeing it as a 3 to 5 year plan. But as we keep saying with this story, it could be anything. So and I'm sure the fans, as you guys are better placed than me to look at this. But no one's complaining about that journey at the minute. But there are some notes of caution that are just there in the background, and people should be mindful of.
Well, Nath, that was a really insightful and fun chat, wasn't it? I thought that Dan made things very clear, didn't he, with his explanations?
He did, but you know what I'm not going to do when I go away and try and pass that info off as my own? I'm just going to use a load of acronyms that people don't know. FSR, SCMP was one, was it? Salary Cap Management Protocol or something? He was really, really good, really, really insightful. And a lot of the comments when we've said, like, we'll do videos, and I think if you're watching this as the full podcast, obviously it will be in there, but I probably also put the financial one out as its own little entity, because hopefully that is something you can share around. And when you get these questions about amortization or pure profit or financial sustainability and gambling and all these sorts of things, that is a good comprehensive guide. So yeah, Dan on, Ryan Hardie in the building. Positive week. Next week we're getting the fixtures. Probably have a kit next week, do you think? Surely. People are going on the holiday soon. We need kits. I reckon next week. Definitely, I think.
You mentioned those sort of acronyms as well. I like the one, Triple R. It's quite nice, isn't it? Ryan Red. And thank you for joining us on this week's podcast. Nath, who do you want opening day of the season?
Oh, I would like a home game, obviously, just because it's always good to start at home. I would like Friday night under the lights, Wrexham against Ipswich, because I think with their sort of European pedigree coming down from the Premier League, Kieran McKenna, I just think they're, for me right now, a bit of a spoiler alert ahead of the Championship. They're my kind of title favourites. So Wrexham at home against Ipswich on Friday night would be chef's kiss, I think.
Give us Millwall away. We'll have a bit of that. Give us a proper Championship tie. I still think Leicester away on the Friday night myself. We will see. And by the next time you listen to this podcast, we will know the EFL fixtures, and we'll bring you all of them, of course, and our reaction to them. So thank you very much to all our guests. Thank you, Nate, for tuning in from your hotel room. Once again, dedication to the cause. Thank you very much to Red 10 People Development for their continued support of the podcast. And thank you to Wrexham-based band Hypnotic for the music and the stings. As always, wherever you are in the world, please do leave a like and subscribe if you haven't already. Take care, and we'll see you again next time.
The Wrexham AFC podcast with Nathan Salt and Rich Bay.